啊？冇啊！ 我就唔知啊，真係唔會，大家知嘅。
胡椒噴霧唔係致命㗎嘛，老胡椒咯，打佢出台啊！馬上咁樣都唔會啦，我要胡椒噴霧。
我係叫佢嗌平反六四啊！
冇嘢啊，陳偉富都唔好打到陳偉富啊！我係長角啊，你啊，逼我翻出嚟。全部都打佢！佢有打你哋兄弟啊！佢有打啲兄弟啊！全部都打佢！
你唔係你合理啲，你叫佢認錯，你要飲我啲嘢，但係你唔好行先，道歉，可以行，你叫佢道歉。你叫佢跪低，你叫佢平反六四，但係你唔可以咁樣去做㗎，你行私刑係關咗邊事啊？道歉，你叫佢道歉，好唔好？掛起佢啊！掛起佢啊！佢都冇用執董事冇功啊！好啦，大家佢打緊你哋兄弟啊！你哋企喺上面，梗係講得輕鬆啦！我哋再砌嗰啲啊！你打死佢係點啊？你咪講緊法事啦！唔好咁樣啦，好唔好啊？而家仲同我講乜嘢啊？嚇？你諗住佢點啊？手法，你自己又唔手法。喂，你諗住將個手機？我問你係咪用錢啊？可以咁樣，係咪講嘢？好啦，我哋死啲人啊！咁樣大家警察打人，你揾藉口警察打人。記者喺晒度，邊個還隻眼俾我哋？邊個還隻眼俾我哋啊？咩話？邊個還隻眼俾我哋啊？邊個還去投俾我？我都俾你打咗啊！你會還俾我啊？你打死佢！唉，你揾佢啊！我都揾佢啊！你唔好點跳！我點跳啊？你揾你講嘅有咩？大家睇自己好嘅。
So yeah, they no idea, but according to this, they are shouting one. So there is only there's so many cameras over there. And then like the movie that when they like to see their pilot, when the police come in and take the behavior to be like
They keep this person, the police will come back. What do you want to do?
I mean the police will come back.
你見唔見到阿賴我翻到入嚟啊？你落我哋行車咯。見唔見到啊？又一陣翻嚟啦，因為呢條友啊就係走啦。定係依家走定係想攞嗰陣啊？我都差唔多打啦，因為有一花燈。我相信你好想同你一齊除咗件防家衣出去玩。其實係㗎，但係我話俾你聽，我啱啱咧，你哋喺呢度。起身啦！
我哋 執佢出，喂，執佢出，
你收容佢得唔好打，唔好打，你同佢扶佢起身啊，唔好打，執佢出，夠啦，死人啦，兄弟，夠啦，喂，夠啦，唔好打，夠啦，唔好再打，死人啦，
你打我哋香港人嘅時候有冇講啲乜嘢？唔打可以啊，怪佢啊！你打我哋香港人嘅時候有冇做過啲乜嘢？怪佢啊！冇啦，起身啦！好啦，夠啦，夠打死人啦！打死人啦！好啦，夠啦，打死人！夠啦，而家快死救人啊！
隻手瘀晒啦！
喂，唔使遮咯，喂！我知道我做乜㗎？個女仔冇咗隻眼喎，俾人斬咗隻腳。
And it looks terrible to many of the people of Hong Kong who might genuinely support the protest movement, but just abhor violence and absolutely hate this type of thing. It's bad enough where the demonstrators were having running battles, but if something happens to this gentleman and he dies, then I think there would be a massive backlash from the general community saying that things are just totally out of control. And you can't possibly take it. You've lost all moral high ground when you do this type of thing. Whether the police will come in and clear this, well, whether they can, we just don't know. Right now, the critical thing is to try and get to him. The police have no one to deal with, Mark. That's the problem. There's nobody they can actually negotiate with and say, listen, you carry on, we want him out, because they can't get to them. There's no one actually to talk to. Everything's done on social media. Everything's done in small groups downstairs, and everyone just moves together. So trying to get a message to them saying we desperately need this guy out as quickly as possible and you can stay is the message they probably want to send, but I don't know how they're going to do it. And so we're going to be stuck here for a while. Maybe paramedic groups, there's an ambulance that's arrived, it's just up the road, I could just see at the top of the ramp. Maybe they're here and they can say, listen, this guy is going to die, you've got to let us take him away. But very volatile, very volatile. Only thing in the favour of the police is the numbers have dramatically dropped in the last hour or so. So a lot of the youngsters here who saw some of the fighting just thought enough is enough and have got the train away from here. But much less people, perhaps then the police can mount some type of operation to get this person out.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that as I say, paramedics are with that individual who had been certainly beaten and stamped upon by some of the protesters. Others have protected him and have formed a sort of protective shield around him where the paramedic is working. But the paramedic is asking for more room to work and no doubt for more paramedics to get in. But the key will be to get this guy out of the airport and to hospital. I think we're joined on the phone as well now by the former Democrat Party member of the Hong Kong Legislative Council, a well-known pro-democracy activist in the colony, Emily Lau. And Emily Lau, I mean, I don't know whether you're witnessing the pictures of this alleged or supposed undercover police officer being ill-treated by some of these protesters, but they're pretty awful scenes.
Yes, indeed, and I don't think Hong Kong people would like to see that. I mean, we support peaceful demonstrations, and in the past few days, the demonstrations at the airport were by and large peaceful, but now I think things are turning ugly, and that is most undesirable. And of course, and that would also lose the support of the public and the international community.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, I guess, who among the protesters is winning the argument? The more extreme elements of the protesters or the core majority? And it seems at the moment the more extreme elements. Are you concerned about that in the way that it may provoke a firmer crackdown by the authorities and even perhaps from Beijing?
Well, I think they should know, and as you rightly said, they emphasize there's no leader and no platform, and they just decide. But I certainly hope they will be sensible, and whatever they try to do is to maintain the support and the sympathy of the public and the international community. And I don't think any behavior that people find unacceptable I don't think we should have that sort of thing, especially on display at the airport. I think this is very, very undesirable and unacceptable.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I'm still looking at pictures, Emily, of Emily Lau, of the individual who seems now to be in the recovery position, and paramedics are with him, so hopefully he will not be too badly injured. But do the protesters give up what moral high ground they may have had with behaviour like this?
Well, I think they must be discussing amongst themselves now, and they should know what tactic to employ. But I think this type of thing cannot and should not go on. And I'm sure the business community in Hong Kong must be very, very concerned. And these are the people who should come out and should speak out. We need a political solution and not to pitch people against the police and all that. I mean, this type of is really, really quite bad. It's bad for Hong Kong's image. And so I certainly hope the people who can talk to the government, who talk to Beijing, must come out and try to find a political solution.
So what is that solution? And surely a political solution requires the protesters to give some ground, as well as the Hong Kong authorities or the Beijing authorities.
Well, indeed. I mean, politics is the art of the possible. So I think both sides have to give some ground. And now I think what people really want is for them to set up an independent commission of inquiry to look into these 10 weeks of all the demonstrations and the chaos. And that's not a very unreasonable demand. And that's not just the protesters, but many, many Hong Kong people also support that, including people from the pro-establishment camp. So I certainly hope people who can talk to them, talk to Beijing and to Carrie Lam, will come out and urge them to really make some concession and try to calm the situation.
Yeah, and the agreement, Emily Lau, with China, between Britain and China in 1997, does allow the Hong Kong government to call in the Chinese military, to invite the Chinese military or military police in to help with law and order. Do you fear that we're getting to a position where that could happen?
Well, of course it's possible, but we certainly do not want to see that. I think the business community and the international community, they don't want to see that, because that would be really bad for Hong Kong and bad for China. And that would be the end of one country, two systems. And so I certainly hope Prime Minister Boris Johnson, although he's very busy with Brexit, but I certainly hope he and Parliament will speak out for Hong Kong. We are going through very difficult, very trying times. And there are many British citizens living here, many British companies here. And I also hope the international community would also urge Beijing and Carrie Lam to come to their senses.
Okay, Emily, I just want to point out to the viewers that what we're witnessing are the beginnings, we understand, of an attempt to get this individual who the protesters are claiming is an undercover police officer, an attempt to get him out of the airport now. And you can see there some paramedics trying to push their way through the crowd. Let's just, if you bear with us, Emily Lau, let's just go back to Stuart Ramsey, our correspondent on the scene. And Stuart, it does seem as though they are trying to get this individual out.
Yeah, that's right. We moved up to him. The thing is, though, Mark, what we've seen of this chaos is, initially at least, it looked like he was coming out. But it's possible that the plan that was talked about a few minutes earlier was about him being taken to what they described as a safe area. Now, the direction they now appear to go goes to some offices and a prayer room inside the airport complex. It's up and to the left from here, but it's still a bit of a way. I would imagine that if they were to do something like that, that's where they would take him. But it appears to have come to a grinding halt. Once again, the paramedics had their gurney in there, but it hasn't been in use, and now it's stopped again. And I can just about make out that there's a discussion taking place, and I think they're trying to move him. Yeah, it's sort of so they're not taking it out. Well, at least the direction it's going. Trying to pull him off. Really? Right. So this actually might. I see. I think the paramedics are trying to take him, and I think everyone else is fairly determined not to let him go. So this is turning into a very, very nasty sort of tug of war over the well-being of this man, regardless of what he is or isn't as a policeman. This is pretty bad stuff. Okay, it looks like the paramedics have had their way, and they're being chased down now. They try to get him away. I think we'll just go. Sorry, I just need to catch up, Mark, with this. It's a bit difficult. There's lots of people everywhere. Okay, so I can see two ambulances in the distance. Some of these people are happy that this prize of theirs, I suppose you might describe it, we're running out, Mark. This prize of theirs has been taken away. They could do with some support here to get him out. They're just doing their job as paramedics. They try to whisk him away as quick as they can and get him inside the ambulance that's at the top of this ramp. There's a lot of press following him, I have to say. There are demonstrators, but not that many. I think they're going to be successful now. Just need to get him into that ambulance and whisk him away as soon as they can. Right,
we're seeing pictures now, Stuart. We're just seeing pictures of the ambulance crews pushing the trolley towards an ambulance, and it does appear that that individual is going to be in that ambulance shortly and on his way to hospital. But it begs the question of where the police are to help them do this.
Yeah, they're not here at all, Mike. Now, I think you probably should be able to see our pictures as well. This is the... I think Michael actually has the shot of the injured man from the inside. They're going to lock up and they're going to move off. No, it's very odd, Mark, isn't it? You'd think the police would have wanted to come and assist. However, they may have made or reached the conclusion that their presence was only going to make the matters worse, and that the medics who help everyone who gets injured in all of these demonstrations would be given the opportunity to get him out. Obviously, there was a tug-of-war to try and stop that happening successfully, but it has happened. So presumably, that was the police calculation. Let's keep away from this for the time being. Let's get this guy out, let's get him safe, and let's have a rethink about what we're going to do with the demonstrators who are still here. Numbers, I'm going to get a better idea of the numbers once the ambulance has gone, and that's it. So that particular thing is over. Mark, that incident, that was turning very nasty indeed. It looks terrible, of course, but at least he's out, and hopefully we'll be okay then, looking after him in hospital. So we're going to go back inside and try and get an idea of the numbers that are in here now that we've had so much violence and so much running about and so many arrests. Difficult to know how many people were caught up. I'll show you a picture over the side just to get some perspective. Usually the ground floor concourse is full of people. It isn't. You can see now that's pretty much looking like a late evening arrivals hall. So what you've got here then is the departure floor and the protesters that are left on it, and we assume some will be preparing to leave now, some will be considering staying. A few hundred did last night. Now that allowed the airport to open for flights between 5 and 6. And it wasn't till, much later, I suppose 1, 2, 3 in the afternoon, that these people moved up to the departure security gates of the departure, sat down, staged protests, and basically brought any chance of anyone actually getting there, getting onto a plane to a standstill. Check-in then was abandoned, and the airport was effectively closed. Arrivals continue to happen and have been continuing right up to this evening, to the last hour or so. Right, just to say on the numbers front. So we look this side. I mean, it's got to be, 150 maybe, I suppose, milling around. There's probably quite a lot of press in there. And then if we come back this way, Row G is where most people have gathered, because that's where the alleged Chinese policeman was being held. Very few people in this section, so the next section is there. So we're down to a few hundreds now. If the police were thinking of coming in, I'd suggest that probably it's best to do it when there's hardly anyone here. We're told that from tomorrow that they're going to try and have a way of stopping people entering the airport if they haven't got a ticket. Now, that exists in many countries, particularly in India, I think in Turkey as well. You can't go in if you don't have a ticket. That doesn't happen here. And the underground or the rail system, effectively, you are in the building on arrival. So it's going to be quite a complicated way of limiting people who have access through the metro and the rail. Obviously, road checks can happen, though to a degree they were beginning already. So you can put those in place. That all takes a bit of time. But we're told that is what is being planned from tomorrow, in an effort to stop the airport being closed for the third time in 3 days.
Well, Stuart, let me just interrupt you there, Stuart. So let me just interrupt you just to bring viewers up to date, and we're seeing the aftermath, really, where Stuart is right now, of a very nasty situation where what the protesters say was an undercover police officer was discovered among the protesters, and they tied him up, they started to beat him, they started to stamp on him, and it was only after some considerable time that paramedics were able to get to him, and the protesters some of the protesters still trying to beat him, others trying to protect him, that those paramedics were then able to offer some help. And the protesters are claiming that they got hold of this individual's bag, and in that bag were a number of belongings, including a T-shirt that they displayed, which said "I love Hong Kong Police." Apparently, they also then displayed his ID cards and his passport, and clearly the thought being that he was in some way involved with the police. The police had. These are now live pictures of the aftermath of that incident. That individual, I should say, has now been taken away to hospital, one assumes, in an ambulance by paramedics, as was an earlier man who was also, the police came in heavy-handed and got him out. So that's the situation at Hong Kong Airport. Much calmer now. Stuart Ramsey's still there. And Stuart, I think my question is there any sign of any leadership of this protest, or is it just utter chaos?
Yeah, no, there is. OK, on the face of it, there's no leadership. This is a community-based decision-making process that comes through everyone speaking on social media, and that their orders and their plans about what they're doing and where they're going is sort of evolves, and that they have little meetings and they talk about things and so on and so on. Most of us don't really believe that. I think that there is a group above that social media who are working together to drive it in the directions they see fit. It doesn't necessarily they're sort of Mr. Evil or anything like that. It's just I think it is a bit more organised. Just to explain where I'm walking to, this is where this is the final areas of the airport where you would be allowed, where you'd pass through security and go through passport control. Now, the reason we've come here is we're told that these sorts of people that you can see, civilians who've been caught up in this, are going to be allowed very slowly but surely to cross the sort of line and go through into the departures section, where they can go to lounges, where they can sleep and whether they can get something to eat properly, because the airport is pretty much a 24-hour airport. If you have a look down the sort of little pockets of people who've been caught here, and for them, what's gone on here over the last hour or so must have been absolutely terrifying, because it's been pretty noisy and pretty scary. Come along here as well, Michael. We'll actually try and head up. Sorry, Mark. We'll just try to head up to the south to see if we can get people coming out as quickly as possible. But yeah, you see, all of the protest movement has basically disappeared now. This is just the passengers who haven't been able to get to hotels, or just perhaps can't afford it. Many of them, I'm sure, can't, and have just had no choice but to sleep it out. What we were told is that those who have been issued boarding passes, boarding passes, and may have had their luggage checked in, may be allowed to go through into the south area, which is right in front of us, and we'll be there in a second. Now, right up until the arrival of the police, right, listen, you can see, there's a lot of people here now. One of the things that would be a concern for the police doing a big raid was what do you do with these people, because they're going to get stuck right in the middle of it. And if it's really heavy going, they're going to be running around. It's not going to be an easy move. So that will be a consideration for the police.
Yeah, Stuart, I just want to make the point.
There we are.
Stuart, just sorry to interrupt you, but it is astonishing that, a few minutes ago we were in the middle of a melee in a very dangerous situation, and that we're now witnessing scenes of apparent normality in an international airport.
It's crazy, isn't it? And it's been a sort of crazy 10 weeks, I think it's fair to say, Mark. So, as you can see, some of these passengers are indeed being allowed to go through, or at least they're in discussion. This has been closed off for hours. Nobody could come here for hours. And it was absolutely rammed with protesters, and if anyone did try to get through, they were pushed away physically. All of these trolleys aren't here for baggage, by the way. This has been basically the wall that was erected. You see it goes all the way around there. Trolleys have been used by the protesters on this particular, for the last particular 3 days on a continuous basis. But isn't it absolutely amazing? Yeah, now we've got people politely queuing, looking at the Terminal 1 check-ins, boards and waiting to see. As you may notice, though, on the first board, it's a very red, cancelled for quite a lot of it. Let's go along here. Obviously, the airlines will slowly but surely try to get things going again.
Yeah.
The staff, we were queuing for a coffee, Mark, about 15, 20 minutes before the police arrived. They just said, sorry, there's no more coffee, got to go. And I just thought, and I said, somebody told her, phoned you and said you've got to close. She just said, yes, the manager of the shop told us to close immediately. And literally, there were only 4 of us in the queue, and it was closed. And then 15 minutes later, the police arrived. So the airlines, and I expect the retail outlets and the food outlets were given some sort of advice to get your staff out, or at least close down the barriers and make sure that they're inside and safe, because the police knew that just by arriving here, things were going to get nasty. But
OK, Stuart, I just want to give you a break. I'll just give you a break, Stuart. We've got Emily Lau still on the phone, so just stand by, Stuart. Yeah. And Emily Lau, I mean, it seems like a flashpoint has passed, but is it a flashpoint that may bring some sort of sanity to this situation and these two sides together?
Well, I certainly hope so. I'm sure many people watching it would be very, very worried and very alarmed. So this is the time for people who have access to the government and to talk to them. And, of course, if some concessions can be made, I'm sure the temperature would cool down. Because I don't think many people want to see such scenes at our international airport. And this is, it's no longer a peaceful demonstration.
No, it isn't any longer a peaceful demonstration. And let me just show viewers the pictures from a few minutes ago at the airport you're looking at now. And it was an alleged undercover police officer being taken out after being beaten and stamped upon by some of the protesters, we should emphasise. Others did try to protect him. But this is the scene as these paramedics and ambulancemen try to get this individual to an ambulance. And it was not easy, and it took a long time through those protesters. And one wonders what images like this will do for the support that these protesters have been enjoying, Emily Lau.
Well, I certainly hope that everybody would calm down. And, if we want to adopt peaceful demonstrations, that's what Hong Kong used to be famous for. And we get a lot of support all over the world. And I hope that we will stick to that and not try to do things that would lose support and sympathy.
And just finally, Emily, what would your message be to the Chinese authorities who may be looking at images that we're looking at and thinking the time has come to instruct the Hong Kong authorities to invite them in to restore law and order? What would your message be if they were thinking about that?
Well, I certainly hope the Chinese government would not even think about, sending the People's Liberation Army onto the streets of Hong Kong, into the airport. There is no need for it. I mean, these people just want the government to set up an independent commission of inquiry. They are not looters, they are not rioters, they're not breaking windows, killing people. So I certainly hope the Chinese government would recognize that, and I hope the business community who can talk to Beijing will also urge Beijing to come out and be sensible.
OK, Emily Lau, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it. We know it's late in the morning there. It is 20 to 1 at night in Hong Kong. Thank you very much indeed. I'm joined now from Hong Kong too by Andrew Leung, who is Hong Kong's former chief representative to the UK. Thank you very much for joining us, Andrew Leung. I guess you've been following what's been happening at the airport. What do you make of the pictures you've been seeing?
Well, it's very, very ugly. In fact, it is, again, giving the protests a bad name. I mean, there's a stopping people injured, even if it's the other side of the camp, from being rescued and going to the ambulance in the international airport. But it also suggests that the protesters are upping the ante and trying to internationalize their protest movement and trying to hold Hong Kong's law and order to ransom in order to press home their demands. But of course, that as far as the Hong Kong government is concerned, Carrie Lam did offer to meet with the protesters, but they were flatly refused unless the government acceded to all, not some, but all of their demands. And some of the demands are virtually impossible to meet. For example, immediate release of all those who have been arrested, including those who committed acts of riot or atrocity, and various other things. But as far as the Beijing is concerned, the last thing Beijing wants is to send in the People's Liberation Army, because that is increasingly seen by Beijing as a trap by the protesters to make China destroy the one country, two systems.
Yeah,
but,
and on that point, Andrew Leung, I mean, it's a calculation for Beijing, isn't it? Because they can't really tolerate scenes like this for much longer, being witnessed by people in China looking at pro-democracy demonstrations like this.
Sure. The assessment has been that the first thing is for the Hong Kong police. Don't forget, the police. Hong Kong police is the Asia's finest, with 30,000 strong. And then the question that the police have been held back is a high degree of caution in not applying some of the tactics to really to go about arresting some of these people. But now they're going in full force. So you can see that the number arrested has gone up drastically. For example, yesterday or the day before, over 150 arrested at a time. It has been estimated that the front end of this militant group, the people who resort to violence and throwing petrol bombs and all that, attacking police stations, number no more than something like 2,000. So 700 have been arrested, and it is perhaps expected that if these arrests keep on going, and then they will be all charged with the maximum possible crimes permitted under the law, like riots and also arson. And because some of them did commit those crimes, so it is hoped that take maybe another couple of weeks or one month or two, the front militant end will become a spent force, and hopefully a degree of semblance of the law and order could be returned, and then the atmosphere could be more conducive to a kind of talk with the protesters. But
yeah,
at the moment,
all right. And I take your point. I just want to put this to you, that Emily Lau, who has been protesting, pro-democracy protester since way before 97, she says they should withdraw the bill completely, abandon the bill, and then set up a commission of inquiry into the way that this whole thing has been handled. Would that be a sensible way forward and a possible way out of this mess?
Well, I mean, as far as the bill is concerned, I mean, the chief executive has already said that the bill is there, but it's not just the words. How is the bill going to move forward? I mean, any sensible person would not see that a bill could ever be revived, because you need the pro-government legislators to support them, but they themselves, those pro-government legislators, are already regretted hugely because they're losing a lot of votes, and elections are coming up. So there's no way that the bill can be revived at all. It's a question of semantics, really. So as far as Beijing is concerned, as far as the Hong Kong government is concerned, the insistence on using the word withdrawal is no more than an excuse to carry on with this kind of violent protests at the front end in order to really change the basic law. Because at the end of the day, the most important demand is universal suffrage. And don't forget, universal suffrage was offered during the umbrella movement. It was rejected because it had to comply with the provisions in the basic law to make sure anyone selected by universal suffrage cannot be a separatist. So that's the deadline. But anyway...
Yeah, so how does this play out, Andrew Leung? How does this play out from here on in? You say you don't think the Chinese will intervene because they'll fall into a trap that they feel will be set by the West. How does it play out then if they're not going to intervene?
Well, as you can see that Beijing has already held 2 or 3 highly unusual press conferences in Beijing, sort of supporting the police, supporting Carrie Lam, to make sure that the law and order will restore, and urging the Hong Kong government to apply the full force of the law, in other words, law enforcement. The police, again, as I said, is already going about it in a more vigorous way, of course, in compliance with the law. But then in the confusion, there are bound to be all sorts of happenings. So the last thing that people want is people got killed on one side. I mean, a girl has already lost her eye, and it still remains uncertain who caused it. Whether it's caused by a steel pellet with a out or someone. So I think that this is a very dangerous situation, but there is no doubt that both Beijing and Hong Kong government wants to use law enforcement to weed out the radical elements in this movement before they can start.
All right, Andrew Leung, we appreciate your time. Thank you for being so patient and joining us tonight. Thank you. And let's just have a recap on where we are with all this in Hong Kong, what's been happening throughout the last couple of hours. And violent clashes broke out between pro-democracy protesters and police inside Hong Kong airport following what amounts to a demonstrator sit-in, which caused the cancellation of all outbound flights for 2 consecutive days, or outbound flights, certainly from lunchtime onwards. At 4 o'clock UK time, 11 p.m. in Hong Kong, police entered the terminal building, but were met with protesters who shone lasers and threw missiles, you can see there. That forced those officers to retreat out of the airport and into waiting police buses. They were replaced just moments later by riot police armed with shields and batons who have been regularly deployed on the streets of Hong Kong. A number of protesters were filmed being detained and arrested by those police. Officers also used pepper spray to push protesters back into the terminal building, and protesters then used barriers and luggage trolleys to barricade themselves in. And then a slightly sinister turn. Protesters then surrounded a man who they believed to be an undercover police officer. He was inside a circle, this circle of people. His hands were cuffed or with luggage ties, cable ties. And the Hong Kong police force sent out a tweet that what they described as a visitor had allegedly been assaulted at the airport and needed immediate medical attention. But the protesters seemed to be claiming that he was in fact an undercover policeman, and that is the man you can see there being detained and restrained with luggage ties, and in fact tied to a luggage trolley. Now, as I say, he was attacked by some of the protesters. Others did protect him, and in the last half an hour the man was seen being rushed away on a stretcher by paramedics before being put into an ambulance and being taken away to hospital and treatment. So that is where we are in Hong Kong. I'm joined on the phone now by Kwok Ka-ki, a member of the Pro-Democracy Civic Party, a politician and member of the Legislative Council in Hong Kong. Thank you very much for joining us. And I wonder if you could just tell us what you make of these pictures. They were very unpleasant pictures for a while when the undercover officer was being beaten.
Yes. Unfortunately, what happened in Hong Kong is the people actually lose all their trust to the government as well as the police. So whenever they saw something strange or, cover up, or anybody maybe coming from mainland have a mission political mission, like to have turning on conflict or assault, even assault, which has been, we saw it in some of the areas in Hong Kong, like North Point and also in Tsuen Wan. So people are very annoyed, and the young people, one of the young lady has lost one eye, and a lot of the young people, according to reports from the media, that a lot of people actually have very severe injury as a result of the violence from the police. At least tens of these young people have the fractures of the bones, head injury, brain damage, a lot of very severe outcome as a result of the arrest and very violent enforcement by the police on Sunday evening. So as a result, people are so angry that most of the people, not only the young, very aggressive young people, but families, ladies taking their children to the airport just to demonstrate, they're angry.
But surely, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but surely, attacking an unprotected, defenceless man, whether undercover police officer or not, does mean you lose the high ground when it comes to violence in these protests.
Yes, exactly. So that's why me and other colleagues, we are in the airport trying to stop this violence. Now, we all understand that violence will not cure anything. It will not deal with or will not solve any problem. But obviously, the root of the violence is not for the young people. The root of the violence is actually from the mainland government and the SAR government through Carrie Lam. Now
I've got to say, Mr. Kwok, the danger is that the violence gets a lot worse, and there has to be a way out of this. So what is the way out of this? What should happen now?
The only way out in Hong Kong have most of the consensus is two things. One is the withdrawal of the bill totally, and secondly is to set up an independent inquiry to look into the whole saga. These two demands is actually not only being raised by the young people, but we now know 2 million of people of Hong Kong, they walk on the street because of that. Not only that, the retired chief judge and a lot of the previous high-level government officials, they all have the same consensus or agreement that in order to solve that, the government through Carrie Lam must do something. But what we witnessed until today is entirely inaction. Nothing has been done. They don't even like to consider any proposal. And this will not solve the problem. This will not, convince the young people to stop demonstration. This will not stop Hong Kong people from going on the street. In fact, on coming Sunday, there will be another large-scale parade in Hong Kong. And the root of the issue is we are actually quite eager to find a solution. And the solution was there. It was actually on the table for 2 months. And for any sensible leaders in any places of the world will have no difficulty to really look into this proposal and perhaps to have a very sensible and quick decision as to set up an inquiry. Just to say, these two sensible proposals will already make a lot of people more comfortable or confident that the government is doing something in the direction of, trying to calm down the whole issue. But we couldn't see any trace of it, even on yesterday's press conference of Carrie Lam. It doesn't.
Mr. Kwok, we've got to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate that. And we're just getting a little bit of information, or apparent information, from a newspaper or website called the Global Times, which is a pro-China news website in Hong Kong. And they are tweeting, apparently, that this individual who the protesters were claiming was an undercover police officer was actually one of their journalists. That's the Global Times saying that the individual taken away to hospital and beaten by some of the protesters was in fact one of its journalists. We can't confirm that. Stuart Ramsey is still at Hong Kong airport where, well, it seems a lot quieter, Stuart. So a claim I've just been describing, and we can only say it is a claim. We don't know that this individual who's gone to hospital was in fact a journalist belonging to a pro-Chinese website, news website.
Yeah, that is the first I've heard of it, and of course it's possible. Nobody ever knows, especially when the mob gets going, if they're going to listen to anything and listen to anything that anyone makes saying and make sense of it. In the middle of the protest, when that gentleman was being beaten up and he was tied and they were fighting back and forth to see whether he should or shouldn't leave, another person was up on top of one of the check-in areas on his phone. And people suddenly started pointing lasers at him and saying that he was spying on them and that he was a policeman. And he was like, no, I'm not. I've been here all day. So it was very, very jumpy. This man could be a journalist. He could also be an undercover police officer. Interesting, the police did come looking for him. And his documents with his papers, just his passport and ID. I'm not sure it said what he did for a living. We'll find out, presumably, from the various papers and news organisations later on. I know you've been talking quite a lot about what's China's reaction going to be about this, and it is difficult to call, but I was talking to Chinese people here who are on their way to Macau and to Taiwan, and they are absolutely convinced that the Chinese are prepared to use their army, and that across the border from here they've already been doing preparations or at least having exercises. Very difficult to know if that's the case, but interesting that two citizens from special areas like Taiwan, obviously, and then Macau were both thinking exactly the same thing, that if Hong Kong goes bad, then it could go bad for everyone else. Well, there's hardly anyone here now, Mark. You can see it's really calmed down. I suspect the airport will try to open again in a few hours' time. Whether the protesters come back, we don't know. If the police really wanted to clear it out, they could do it now, because there's not many of them left. If they don't, the numbers will grow, I'm pretty certain. We're waiting for a call to them to come and see if they can close this airport for the third day in a row. Right.
OK, Stuart, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Hong Kong. And just to repeat what we've been seeing, and it involves an individual who, well, various claims that he was an undercover police officer or pro-China journalist being caught, beaten, stamped on by protesters at the international airport in Hong Kong during a protest there. Another day of cancelled flights, another day of protests in Hong Kong, much more at the top of the hour.
Another edition